Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America. On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, we talk to prominent US citizens not just about their country's past and present, but also about its future. What, I ask my American guests, will be the 21st century fate of their now venerable republic?
Hello, everybody. It's Monday, August the 4th, 2025. The headlines are dire. New York Times leads with the continuing tragedy in Gaza. A headline about whether or not Netanyahu is squandering his moment to halt the war. He squandered it in the past, and one wouldn't be surprised if he squanders it in the future. The Wall Street Journal leads with a really interesting story. Actually, we've done a lot of shows on this sort of thing about how China is choking the supply of critical minerals to Western defense companies. Surprise, surprise. And the Financial Times leads with another interesting story about how the Tesla board is awarding $30 billion worth of shares to Elon Musk. Elon has threatened them that he'll walk unless he gets his 30 billion. So lots to talk about today, but we've chosen to talk about an even more important subject, the subject of this show, or at least the medium of this show, podcasts. The question of today's show, much more important than any of those news stories, is, are podcasts ruining our lives? My guest, Liel Leibovitz, is the editor-at-large at the excellent Tablet magazine, and he's authored this. He suggests that there is an insidious charm of chat. Liel is joining us from Tel Aviv in Israel. Liel, important subject. Are podcasts ruining our lives? I guess, including my own.
In one word, yes. And I came to this conclusion, like all righteous people do, by doing everything wrong for very long. I myself had a podcast. I was the host of a show called Unorthodox, which, according to God and iTunes, was the universe's most popular Jewish podcast. I greatly enjoyed all the popularity, the very narrow scale popularity that the show kind of blessed me with, like never being able to go buy some smoked salmon in New York's Upper West Side without being recognized by some listener, and really believed that this was a fun, real, intimate new medium that opened new possibilities for communications, until one day I received a very curious artifact in the mail. It was an envelope containing a photo of a lovely, chubby, tabby cat with a note from a listener that told me that because I was her favorite podcaster, she had chosen to name this animal after me. The animal will from here on be known in America as Liel, which for about 2 weeks deeply, deeply flattered me and stroked my ego, and then started bothering me because I started imagining, the scenario of this woman who had never met me and did not know me, walking around with this animal, rubbing against her feet and having to say my name, 3, 4, 36 times each day. And then I began asking what led her to the state in which she felt this was a good idea to name the animal after me. Most of us don't name animals after, say, favorite movie stars or favorite sculptors or painters or, expressionist poets. There was something, I thought, about this interaction of ours that led her to believe as if she really knew me. Podcasting, as you know, as anyone who's listened to them know, they're different. We listen to them when we do the dishes. We listen to them when we walk the dog. We listen to them when we're at our most vulnerable and intimate settings. It used to be that if you wanted another
What's
human
vulnerable
voice there,
about doing
uh,
washing up, Liel?
well,
I don't know.
again,
I would have thought that's our least vulnerable moment.
I think it's the moment in which you least expect another kind of. Let me put it this way. It used to be that if you wanted another human voice when you were washing up, you had to call, your wife, your husband, your sister, your friend, and have a real person with whom you had a real relationship standing right there and actually speaking. And all of a sudden, we've replaced this with sort
Mm.
of artificial voices of people who we don't know, who speak and sound and come at us as if we're all dear friends. It's this kind of like, parasympathetic social relationship that are predicated in a weird way on a big lie. And this kind of led me thinking, no one in their right mind, you mentioned a lot of great big headlines in the beginning of this interview. No one in their right mind would come and say, I have very, big opinions about Israel and Gaza or China or Elon Musk because I saw a TikTok video that told me how to think about the world. You would sound crazy, and everyone would look at you like fell off, the moon. But if you said something like, hey, I listened to a podcast and this person made a very, very good point about China's use of minerals, everyone would, nod their heads and say, yes, this is a completely legitimate way of forming information. I'm arguing that there's a bait and switch here that we don't fully understand, and it is really insidious.
I don't want to be the defender of podcasts because I don't think I probably like them any more than you, even if I have one myself. But yesterday we had a show with a very smart academic about Xi Jinping's father. He was an expert and authority. I take your point on the intimacy of podcasts. The argument in favor is that if you wanted to listen to a show about Xi Jinping's father, it would be very difficult on CNN, that tends to trivialize all news, or MSNBC, or God forbid, Fox. And this is actually an excellent medium for the discussion of interesting, important subjects that mainstream media, if there is even such a term or a thing these days, misses entirely and ignores and chooses to ignore. How would you respond to that? I mean, podcasts don't always have to be as trivial, as trivially intimate as you're suggesting. They can be about important, serious subjects, and people can learn a lot.
I would respond to that by saying Amen Selah. Like all bearded zealots, I too come to my, critique of podcasting out of a great, deep, big love for the medium, and also a profound faith that they can, in fact, were designed to do precisely, Andrew, what you just said that they should do, to have real in-depth conversations about topics that CNN and the other sort of failed mainstream media will never permit. And in fact, that was the source of my tremendous enthusiasm and passion for this medium for the first 10, 15 years of my engagement with it. What my piece is really about, and what my chagrin is really about, is the acknowledgement of how rapidly podcasters jumped right into the same shallow, tepid wading pool as all other media outlets, replacing the opportunities for real conversations, real insights, real explorations, which podcasts are actually uniquely suited to deliver, with the same kind of facile currency of saying, hey, we're going to have these ridiculous conversations in which we don't really ask anything of any real merit, in which we don't really pose any inconveniences, in which we don't really try to get to the bottom of anything. And I think if you've and this is not a diss on the world's most popular podcaster, who I think does tremendous things, but if you, for example, listened
You're talking about me, of course, right?
I am talking absolutely about you. I should say second most popular podcaster, Joe Rogan. If you listen to his conversation, for example, with Elon Musk, it begins with this, almost intolerable, one of the recent ones at least, almost intolerable 40-minute kind of rant about, oh, so remember in the 2000s when you used to play this video game? Did you like playing this video game? Were you good at it? How many hours a day, et cetera, et cetera. You're talking to a person who is insinuating himself into every corner of American and increasingly global public life, a person with real, influence on
You're
the
talking
way so
about
many of
Musk
us.
or Rogan?
I am talking about Musk, and I'm
Although you
saying,
could equally be talking about Rogan.
correct, but I'm saying to Rogan, for the same price, man, you could have had a real conversation. You could have asked him questions. But here's the problem: had you asked him any real conversations, you would not have received the same chummy, broy access that this new cast of, sometimes referred to in the American press as the manosphere, this new cast of, instantaneously popular podcasters receive. Podcasters understood very quickly what mainstream media broadcasters and writers took much longer to understand, which is access comes at a price, and
Yeah,
if you
I
want to,
take your
yep.
point, Liel, although I'm not sure. Well, maybe I take half your point, but we can also blame the listeners. I mean, I take your point on Rogan and Musk, and maybe his interview could have been more hard-hitting. But the reality is that most people want that. That's why Rogan's so popular. I mean, small podcasters like yourself or myself, we scratch our heads and think, why can't we be like Joe Rogan? Maybe because we're too serious. I mean, maybe if I was a little less serious, that's why I've got you on the show, I'd get anywhere near his kind of audience. This is what people want to listen to, for better or worse. So the fact that, I mean, our podcast ruining our lives, the reality is our lives are already ruined with or without podcasts, it seems to me.
Andrew, I love nothing more than to blame my listeners and my readers. I will take it. I'll take the suggestion any
No,
day.
I'm not
But
blaming my listeners or readers. I'm blaming the people who aren't listening and aren't reading my stuff.
I will tell you this. Even though I'm very kind of keen, and the no pun intended,
Yeah.
on blaming the sort of mass audience of American podcast listeners, I simply don't think it's true, and here's why. If you ask people, which is actually kind of an exercise that I did before the show, I was like, name one podcast episode that you remember, like actually remember, that stayed with you, that lingered, that you kind of find yourself thinking about. Um, about 65-70% of them had the exact same answer, like, oh, Lex Friedman with Jared Kushner. Now, if you go through Lex Friedman's, oeuvre, you're going to find a lot of the same, a lot of the kind of like, oh, we have this famous influential person here. I'm going to ask him a bunch of, nothing insignificant questions and just pass the next 3 hours rehashing the same dumb anecdotes as everyone else. For a whole host of reasons that become obvious if you listen to the episode, when Jared Kushner came to sit down for an interview, Lex asked him a series of real questions, actually insightful questions about Donald Trump, about Republicans and Democrats, about Russiagate, about Israel and Palestine, Abraham Accords, real things. And here's what happened. Jared Kushner actually answered the questions. And as a result, the episode really kind of sparkled. And audience members loved it. They responded to it very viscerally because they could feel that they were getting something real. I think the first kind of mass popular podcaster who understands that it's not this kind of trade-off between access to celebrity interviewers that makes the audience members come on, but that they actually have a platform to say things and have real in-depth conversations, is going to win big time.
I mean, that's good for me to hear. Maybe I've got a future. So why did you stop podcasting? You seem a fairly straight-talking guy, Liel. Why did you stop podcasting? I would have
First of
thought.
all, I didn't
I know the
stop.
guys
I'm
who
gonna brag.
run Tablet, they're pretty open-minded. They could have. I'm sure they wouldn't be editorially engaged. Why couldn't you have that kind of podcast?
We're doing exactly that, but we want to make sure that we do it, and we're going to relaunch again in the next month or so. We want to make sure that when we relaunch our offerings, we do it in a way that actually puts our money where our mouth is, that we do it in a way that is, engaged, that is, responsible, that is interesting, that is rooted in something that is much more than the kind of facile exchange of pleasantries that has come to dominate all podcasts. And look, this insight came at a cost. We had a very popular podcast. It had a lot of listeners. We had sold out live shows. To wake up one morning, and it obviously was in one morning, it was a long process, and decide, we're gonna kill this goose that's laying golden eggs, because I can't do it anymore, because it's not honest, because we're lying. That was a hard freaking thing to do, man. So we want to make sure that when we pick it up again, we do it out of a sense of real commitment to repair, rather than just cashing in on everything that's broken.
Well, I hope you'll invite me on the new show. When
Right away. Serious.
I mean, this. So what you're really saying then, Liel, is that that chat is insidious, insidiously charming, and that a good podcast would be neither charming nor, by definition, insidious. Is that right?
No more charm, Comrade Keen. We will not allow any such thing. No, I mean, look, it's kind of complex. I'm starting with this realization that still kind of haunts me, if we're being honest, at just how incredibly intimate this medium is. It is not like television. It forms a different type of, not even like radio, it forms a different kind of emotional connection. Now, I asked myself, what's the next step? I'm saying, first of all, as a result, people have come to trust this source of information much quicker and much more kind of profoundly, robustly, enthusiastically than they have other forms of digitally based, media. And rather than take this trust and this opportunity and build it into something that is, more searching, more striking, more, kind of willing to take big risks, this clan of very popular podcasters really made a different choice, which is to emulate everything that was bad and broken about the old media. I'm saying, if you go back to its origins, which is why my piece begins with this, kind of gonzo history of podcasting as a genre, you see that the first people who started up with this idea, with this technology, with this medium, were people who were actually really kind of keen on taking big risks
Who
and
are
on
the
figuring
models?
out,
Who come to mind in particular? These pioneers.
Well, the thing that sort of struck me when I started doing the research, like every other big historical question, especially ones pertaining to relatively new phenomenon, of course, there's a real big argument. Some people say that the first podcaster was the Ayatollah Khomeini, which says a thing or two about the medium, because he rose to power in large part because he recorded these very long rants from a little blue and white striped tent in a yard in France, that were then broadcast. It was then broadcast via long distance telephone calls to Iran, recorded and disseminated. But the thing that I think could be called the first ever podcast was a show that was produced by several music reporters in that hotbed of cosmopolitan activity, Rostov on Don, in the former Soviet Union. They figured out that the Soviet Union was about to collapse. There was some more room for fun and experimentation, and so they started a quote unquote show. They recorded it in their home. It had friends, musicians playing songs, talking about culture, talking about politics, and then they distributed the show via tape. They would just basically walk around town and give people cassette tapes of their show, and they called it, tongue very firmly in cheek, the illusion of independent radio, because they understood that there was something ridiculous about this, kind of effect of intimacy, and B, that no real kind of profound, well-established medium like radio would ever broadcast them, especially not in a controlled environment like Soviet Russia. But it took on very well, and they had the sort of good or bad fortune, depending on your point of view, of coming to this conclusion just a minute and a half before the internet and RSS feeds came about and made distribution, which is always the most difficult part of the equation, a no-brainer. And so I think if you look at that, you understand what a real potential this genre, this medium still has to produce conversations that are so charming. And again, I'm not advocating for conversations go like, Andrew Keene, is it true that you are indeed like I don't I think there's also something really revolting about this theater of accusations that passes sometimes for profundity. I think the medium could remain very charming. It could remain very open. It can remain very intimate, but without basically making that switcheroo of being like, okay, well, you already feel this kind of like affinity with me. I'm going to flip it and make you feel like you're really Donald Trump by asking a bunch of dumbass questions, or the real Elon Musk by asking a bunch of, stupid questions that basically make the podcaster look like, a host on one of those QVC like stations on TV where they're just hawking wares and you just point to the thing that you're selling and then sell it. We could do better. And I think the medium would really develop once we start thinking like that.
Yeah, you brought up the I word several times, Liel, intimacy. The promise, of course, of new media, podcasts, blogs, all the rest of it, was that you would have this disintermediated relationship between the creator of the content and the listener, the viewer, the reader. Are you suggesting in a way that some distance is useful, that these podcasters, the Rogans of the world, the popular online Substackers now, they're too intimate with their readers and listeners, and that there needs to be a degree of distance?
Oh, I'm suggesting something even more troubling. Look, during COVID and podcasting, I spent a lot of time on that in my piece. Podcasting really took off in a very major way during COVID for a whole host of reasons. Basically, you had a whole audience that kind of stuck at home, learning very quickly not to believe the government, the media, or anyone else. But during COVID, there was an experiment that I think was very interesting and very telling. A bunch of respectable Silicon Valley investors
Is there such a
went
thing,
in
Liel,
on
as
an
respectable Silicon Valley investors? You're already putting your cards on the table there.
how dare you accuse me of
Are they paying you? Are you in the pay of these
putting my
people?
tongue in cheek? I was being somewhat facetious because obviously the story I'm about to tell is the story of a major failure. They invested in an app that I assume you remember very well. I was completely addicted to it, called
Yes,
Clubhouse.
of course.
And the promise of Clubhouse is that you would come into a room, a virtual room, and there's no telling what's going on in this room. In fact, on not one, not two, but three occasions, I was in a Clubhouse room in which Elon Musk,
Ah,
the
your
man
favorite,
himself,
your favorite billionaire,
emerged.
Liel.
Right. Came in and started talking. Oh my God, I'm actually talking to Elon Musk. And you would think that if intimacy was the actual currency, that Clubhouse would blow podcasts out of the water because, hey, what's better than, listening to, Joe Rogan talk to Elon Musk? Hey, I could talk to freaking Elon Musk myself. Clubhouse failed. It failed, and podcasting succeeded because what people really want is not unfettered, unmediated intimacy, which actually comes at a cost, the cost of actually having to talk to a person and have relationship. They want, again, this sort of like parasympathetic, parasocial relationship with a person. It feels intimate, but it not exactly is, which is why the real great kind of, I think, sort of sea change moment in podcasting is the moment that Serial, the famous true crime podcast, came to be. Because what Serial did is give this veneer, this stamp of respectability to podcasting. Oh, look, it does real journalism. It solves real crimes. It is serious because it comes from National Public Radio. So it wed in this, again, to use the term, insidious way, the facade of intimacy with the facade of respectability, while actually delivering
Yeah,
meaning.
worst of all worlds.
That's my problem. Yes.
Are we, in historical terms, I know you done a lot of research on the history of podcasting for your piece in Tablet. Are we? It seems to me, as a podcaster, we're in a, if not a nuclear winter in the history of podcasts. So it's not a great time because it's very, very hard to make money. A lot of people thought that they could drive podcast revenue through advertising. I'm not quite sure how you do it with Tablet. I'm guessing through some sort of subscription, and having a brand like Tablet probably helps. But is this a bad time for podcasters, and particularly a bad time to actually start a podcast? Or is that in its own way a good reason to start a podcast? Because when the bad times are here, the brave get most people get going, except the brave. I can't remember the phrase, but they're the ones who actually benefit.
Where the going gets weird, the weird go pro.
Exactly.
As a great journalist once put it. Look, you'll forgive me, I hope, if I exude a great deal of optimism. I think it's a fantastic time. And I want to answer why, like every good Jew does, with a story. This is probably my favorite ever media history story. This is a story about Fred Friendly, the very, very famous television producer, who was, one of the sort of founding fathers of CBS television news. And one day in the 50s, it was very, very hot in New York City. The country was going through a heat wave, and Fred Friendly wanted to kind of have a way of visually convincing or conveying this heat wave to the viewers. So he dragged an enormous block of ice, like a 10 feet tall block of ice, to the studio, and it was right there behind the anchor. And as the anchor delivered the news, the block of ice kind of melted and melted and melted until it was all gone by the end of the broadcast. And it was a very kind of visually striking thing, and everyone was very impressed with Fred Friendly. And then everyone goes out to a bar after the show, as they did back in the good old days. And Fred Friendly takes his beer and looks at the person sitting next to him and says, it's television. We could have gotten an ice cube and just closed up on it. That was the moment of understanding what the medium could actually do. I think we're living through a time of understanding what the medium could actually do. The Rogans of this world came in and did wonderful things, but they did the sort of first, most obvious, and in many ways kind of most facile and almost meaningless thing by just, kind of doing this chat, picking up exactly where their tainted elder brothers and sisters in mainstream media picked off. Now is the time for such great minds and voices as yourself to come in and say, okay, well, now comes the actual growth. Now comes the actual golden age. Now comes the point in which we figure out what we could do with the inherent intrinsic qualities of this medium.
Well, I don't want to stereotype you as a Jew, Liel, but what about the money? How do you make money out of this?
Look at my face. I think that this answer is also solving itself. Look, I believe that we are at a tremendously interesting time in the history of media. I think for a very long time we kind of were in a orgiastic mindset in which we enjoyed a glut of quote unquote information. And I think in recent years, and more so in the last, say, 18 months, people realize that information as such is actually absolutely freaking meaningless. When you get to a point where you sit in bed at the end of the day, it's like, where did I read this article about this? Was it the Journal or the Times or the Economist or my sister's blog or Twitter? I don't know, because it is all a torrent of nonsense that is just like constantly sort of weighing me down. I think at that point, people realize that it's time to take a step back, understand precisely which media outlets and or very important media individuals deliver things of real value, insight, analysis, and knowledge. And then I think people are increasingly very comfortable with the idea of paying for it. Because one of the great aftershocks of the digital revolution, I think, is that anything that reeks of analog is now luxury. So if I'm now kind of, paying for a relationship with a podcaster, which I understand is not an analog proposition, but I'm paying for access to a person in some way. I feel good about myself because I know that I'm buying a quality product. I no longer want the dross that comes in for free through the machine.
And what about Liel Leibovitz? I mean, you strike me as the classic independent podcaster. You could just have your own show. It doesn't take a lot of technological know-how. Why are you working for Tablet, a traditional or relatively traditional online magazine? Why hide behind the Tablet brand? Why not just have Liel Leibovitz show?
Easiest question
But they pay
you've
you, right?
asked as of yet. No, I mean that's the reason is that 15 years ago, my dear friend and our founding editor Alana Newhouse did me the honor of a lifetime, asking me to come on board and help her conceive of this publication. Our intent was always, upon kind of establishment, was to be everyone's favorite third or fourth or eighth read. And as we started getting up and running, something fascinating happened, which is more or less all of American media went ahead and committed mass suicide, beclowning themselves by pursuing stories that they knew were false, by pursuing methods of reporting and conducting their business that they knew were disastrous. And then everything collapsed, and Tablet remained, in my unbiased opinion, the finest magazine
Well, you
in the
would say
world
that.
today. I would say that, and I believe it like I believe nothing else, and I'm very proud of it. And when you have the opportunity, and this is why this world is so interesting, when you have the opportunity not just to do it by yourself, which is perfectly fine, and a lot of people did, but to do it with a lot of other people, not a lot, with a handful of other people who challenge you, who inspire you, who enable you, who have these kinds of fruitful conversations that accelerate you, to borrow a term from Boris Pasternak. That is the greatest gift ever. By the way, this is how you get all of a sudden new media empires like Barry Weiss's Free Press coming up almost seemingly overnight, because they're a collection of curious, open-minded, open-hearted people who are having conversations together. This is what media has always been, and this is what media shall be once again.
Yeah, I take your point on Barry Weiss, although my guess with her is that she will sell it to the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN. What about the, shall we say, the $10 trillion gorilla in the room, Liel, AI? We've done lots of shows, and in fact, I came up with that $10 trillion number because a couple of days ago I did a show with my friend Keith Tier, who is arguing that OpenAI will be worth $10 trillion in the next few years, and that Anthropic will be worth $5 trillion. Maybe he's crazy, maybe he isn't, but it's already being valued as private companies in the trillions. Certainly in the hundreds of billions. How does AI change this, or is it just one more technological distraction?
I don't think it's one more technological distraction, but look, for my sins, I in my misspent youth made the mistake of pursuing a PhD in communications at a university of which I'm no longer proud at all, Columbia. And over the course of my kind of inquiries into the history of mass communications, I witnessed more than a few instances in which people thought, oh, this will change everything. In almost every single one of these junctures, the changes were very profound. They were very real. They had huge implications. If you look at, for example, what print did to enable political organization and reshape relationship between nation states, very, very big changes. At no point did it look like the kind of the dawn of the machines and end of mankind moment that the prognosticators of AI are now advocating. I think AI will have, and we could have, a 7.5 hour long conversation just in that question. I think it will have very, very, very profound implications. But I think one of the greatest implications that is receiving far less attention than it ought to is simple. It will kind of raise the value of human beings who are actually capable of delivering that same magical quality of storytelling that only human beings can ever, have ever, and will ever be able to deliver tremendously. So if you had, there was a skit that I saw the other day, someone walking into a movie theater, and the guy says, okay, well, do you want a regular movie or an organic movie? He's like, what's the difference? So organic movie was made by humans, a regular movie, AI, and the difference between them is like $300 ticket. I think people would value more and more and more and more the kind of art, storytelling, conversations, journalism that they understand, may use some technological tools for, point this and that. There's no reason, for example, not to have AI help with a great big CGI scene that otherwise would have taken, 17 animators a year and a half to complete. But I think the value of individual human genius, analog human genius, flesh and blood human genius will skyrocket in this new age, and I love it.
Liel, you noted that you're not particularly proud, disappointed with your former university, Columbia. I'm curious why. Are you disappointed because of their inability to stand up to the US government, or perhaps their curriculum and cultural decisions on Middle Eastern politics?
It's neither. I am disappointed at their decision to stop being a freaking university, which, in my mind, is a place that is dedicated to the free and unfettered exchange of ideas, where people who believe or want to kind of research whatever question they want to research have a place to sit down and exchange views and opinions in a sort of wildly creative and containing and inviting manner. And American universities in general, but Columbia in particular, have not been that for a very long time. They have become a sort of cesspool of mutually accrediting mediocrities in which all you have to do is believe very, very, very narrow things, and it doesn't even matter if you happen to share their ideological convictions or not. I think once a university sets more store in letting people wave the flags of terrorist organizations in the quad than making students feel like they're safe and able to exchange opinions in the library. I think it lost the track, and I hope to see it reformed, but have very little hope for it.
Well, I hope that this conversation has ruined some of your lives, as long as we have listeners. But let's end on a more serious note, or a more immediate note. You're talking to me from Israel. The headlines today, at least in the New York Times, are about supposedly Netanyahu squandering his moment to halt the war. What's the news out of Tel Aviv on the 4th of August, 2025, Liel? And what's your take on the current situation?
Look, I will never presume that I could be the bearer of the news out of the Jewish state. As you know, the old Jewish joke goes that whenever you have two Jews, you have at least three opinions.
Well, give us three. Give us
People
three.
here.
Three. You can be one Jew with three opinions.
I'll give you one, which I think is the one that actually is the closest to uniting everyone here. That opinion is very simple, and you will not see it, sadly, on the front page of the New York Times, and it is this. Hamas is solely responsible for the atrocities that we're seeing in Gaza Strip right now. It is actively holding back aid supplies from its own people. It is still holding Israeli civilians that it kidnapped from their homes, from a concert. It is not allowing the Red Cross any access to these hostages. It is behaving in a barbaric way. That organization is a threat to anyone who still has any kind of affinity to civilization. To have the story thwarted in such a way in which Hamas is given a pass because they have managed through a whole set of reasons to convince
Who's
people that
giving
they're the
them the
victims.
pass, Liel?
Anyone who's suggesting that they should be rewarded with a Palestinian state for the murderous terror attack that they have conducted, anyone who is not
I'm not
stepping
sure
in,
that. We think
demanding that they
about
release the hostages, anyone who's not leading with the front page story today of a starved Holocaust-like skeletal Jew Evyatar David, who was kidnapped from a rock concert and is held under terrible conditions, forced to dig his own grave while actually starving. Anyone who doesn't care about that, there's an old name for people who don't particularly like or care about the suffering of Jews, but most people who hold these views don't seem keen on admitting that.
What's that name?
That name is an anti-Semite.
I don't want to turn this into a long conversation, but some people might say, the French decision, for example, isn't necessarily rewarding Hamas. But finally, it is an odd spectacle, this sort of mutual starvation, it would seem. The Israelis, or some people would argue the Israelis, are trying to starve. It seems as if they're starving the Palestinian people. And as you know, the Hamas people are starving Israeli hostages. Has that ever happened before? Maybe you should do a podcast about it.
Look, the question to me is not, has it happened before? The question to me is it happening now? And the answer is no. Even if you hold for some reason that a country has any obligation while at war that it did not start, to supply its enemies with anything, even if you hold that, I don't think anyone would say, for example, that the Allies had any obligations to drop food on Dresden during World War II. But let's say that you go a step further and say, okay, well, we want to alleviate the suffering of the population there. When you actually look at facts, and it's not hard to, because it's all documented, and you see the tons upon tons of aid and food and medicine that is being allowed into Gaza Strip. Israel is not actively doing anything to prevent it, quite the contrary, but is being there held at gunpoint by Hamas, that is controlling the entire strip and not allowing the distribution of these goods because A, they pilfer much of it, and B, they have every given interest in delivering this idea because they can't win on the battlefield. The only place that they could actually fight Israel is by convincing the world that the bad Jews are, committing atrocities against them, just as the Nazis have committed atrocities against the Jews. It is a perfidious lie, and the lies fall apart. They had this starving, kind of like really horrible looking health-wise kid on the front pages of every newspaper in the world. It took days for people to finally figure out that this was a kid who was suffering from a previous neurological condition, had nothing to do with, supposed access to food. We see this lying again and again and again. The Israeli skeletal person, the hostage forced to dig his own grave, that's not a lie. That is a person kidnapped from a party by a terrorist organization who breached an internationally recognized border. If you can't see, and I don't mean you personally, but if a person cannot see the differences between A and B, then that person has a very deep moral and intellectual problem.
You know what Hamas should do? Should start a podcast, Liel.
Oh, then we would hate them even more, as if that's possible.
Well, the insidious charm of chat with Liel Leibovitz. Interesting piece, interesting argument. Our podcast ruining our lives. I know that the title of this show will be Our Podcast Ruining Our Lives, even this one. The answer is, I hope so, because that means people are listening. Great to have you, Liel. We'll get you back on the show. I'm curious as to the relaunch of Unorthodox on tablet, which I think is an excellent online publication. We'll have to do some more with you. So best of luck. And keep well, keep safe, Liel. Very interesting conversation.
What a pleasure. Thank you.